On today's show, I am joined by Dylan Burkhardt of Hoops to talk about Kobe Bufkin, the Hawks' first-round pick. Kind of a deep dive into him as we did previously with other players. A lot to get excited about. We'll have all of that and more on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1515 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday here in early July. And thank you for joining us, as always, on the podcast, making us your first listen here at Locked On Hawks each and every day. Check us out and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Spotify or Apple or YouTube on the video side. And I'm joined in a second by Dylan Burkhardt talking about Kobe Bufkin and sort of a breakdown in that fashion, as you might expect to be a first-round draft pick for the Hawks. Previously, I talked to Bill DeFilippo about Seth Lundy, the Hawks' second-round draft pick, also Mohamed Gay with Bryce Hendricks in previous days, also a recent trade breakdown podcast by myself with regard to the Usman Garuba Ty Washington trade that took place over the weekend. Also, our last podcast, most recently, was a Summer League preview episode talking about the roster and the schedule, and also a rundown on the latest rumors with Pascal Siakam. Not much has changed there in the day or so since then across July 4th, but obviously we'll spring into action if anything were to happen in the bigger world at that point in time with rumors or all that fun scuttlebutt this time of year. But as of now, today's podcast will just solely focus on Kobe Bufkin. So without any further delay, I'll be diving in with Dylan Burkhardt on Kobe Bufkin in just 1 second. I'm joined now by a genuine Michigan basketball expert. Honestly, and I promise everyone, my first call when I heard that Kobe Bufkin was going to be the pick at 15 overall. Dylan Burkhardt. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, thank you. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I didn't say this before we started recording. Last year, I had an inkling that the Hawks actually might consider Moussa Diabate in the second round, and I was almost going to tell you and that I was going to ask you to come, almost like pre-ask you to come on the podcast, and then he went before the Hawks pick. So this is sort of the payback for all of that. And this year they had two options. It was Kobe or Jett Howard. I thought they were both kind of in the Hawks range, and here we are with Kobe Bufkin. I want to start because, obviously you have very deep insight on Kobe. I want to start even before he got to Michigan because I know you cover recruiting for Michigan. He was a pretty good recruit for Michigan and kind of had a weird freshman season as well. So I want to start there. Are you surprised at all with how this kind of trajectory went? Because clearly a lot of people are focused on this year, which is when he kind of broke out, obviously. But what did you make of Kobe before he even got to Michigan and kind of how the freshman year went? Because even he said at the draft, it was not like what he expected necessarily.
Yeah, it's really interesting because of just everything that was going on at the time. Like everyone knew Kobe Bufkin was a good prospect. He was kind of like a top 60, top 75 prospect as a younger guy in high school, right? Like everyone knew he was good. And then COVID happens and his main kind of what would be his like prep, his grassroots summer basically got wiped away due to COVID. There was no EYBL that summer. There was a lot of, if you go back and look at that high school recruiting class, there are a lot of misses. There are a lot of guys from that class that are in the transfer portal now who are supposed to be All-Americans. They're not in the draft, right? It was a weird year. And he was one of the big risers. He played in a few like smaller events, not shoe circuit stuff, looked really good, had a really good senior year until I want to say he hurt his wrist, but he missed like the last few games of the year. And all of a sudden he ended up kind of in the McDonald's All-American game. Like he wasn't really this top 25 prospect, but everyone was like, wow, this guy's had a great 12 to 24 months here. And the problem was always, what does that mean when it's not Peach Jam. It's not some of these high profile events. Not everyone is there. You're watching off streams. It was just sort of unprecedented territory to figure out what was up from down in recruiting because it wasn't what you're used to, right? The priors weren't there. But the thing that always stood out about Kobe is that he was basically a year younger than everyone in his grade.
Yeah.
And that was why he was an awesome prospect, right? Like everyone's like, wow, well, look at all the upside. He's really he should be playing U16. But in the end, it really came to impact him as a freshman at Michigan. He came in, he was very skinny, very young, and just really struggled defensively to kind of pick up Michigan schemes and really make an impact on that side to the point where he just was out of the rotation for most of that year. And I was always a big fan of what he could do with the ball and thought he had a lot of potential, but it was also pretty clear, like, look, this guy he can't play rotation minutes in the Big Ten right now just because of where he's at physically, where he's at mentally, and kind of how he's processing the game. So I think his freshman year was probably as disappointing as you could expect based on kind of those expectations and everything else. But at the same point, I think he was kind of like a breakout player hiding in plain sight headed into a sophomore year, just because those are the kind of things that can be fixed in an off season, right? Like, you're going to be stronger. You're going to know what's going on in a way that you didn't before, and there was going to be opportunity there. So I don't know if I would have said, wow, like, he's definitely going to be a lottery pick after his sophomore year. But at the same time, judging by his trajectory, he's never a guy I'm like, he's going to be a 4-year player at Michigan or anything like that. So the acceleration came quick, but you also could kind of see it coming, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember when he came in. Obviously, I've told my audience I'm a Michigan fan, so I pay attention to this stuff very closely. And it was disappointing for sure his freshman season. I think he made a quip on draft night about how basically he couldn't guard anybody as a freshman. You just said that, and he admitted it. And part of that was strength. And also, actually, I was going to ask you this later, but I'll ask you it now. The Big Ten's playing style probably doesn't like set up for an 18-year-old freshman like Kobe Bufkin, who's as skinny as he was. Does that make sense? I mean, I want to know like what you meant, because I know you cover the whole Big Ten in general too. Like, what do you make of like that translation in general? Not even just with Kobe, but like there's a lot of playing style questions. There's a lot of talk about playing style with like Jalen Hood-Schifino, for instance, and like a lot of the Big Ten playing kind of bigger, a little bit more old school in some ways. How do you kind of parse that with compared to some of these other leagues where these guys are coming from?
So it's hard because I don't follow the NBA that closely, and I don't know, like, these guys kind of go off and I never really think of them again. So I don't know maybe like what has translated and what hasn't to the NBA from the Big Ten. Generally, I think just from how closely I follow college basketball and how the draft is evaluated, I think there's a lot of opportunity probably to draft people who aren't used properly in college, because I think there's so much focus on their stats, their numbers, everything. A lot of guys play the role they play because of what their team needs, and maybe their offensive system isn't great or their offensive system is really great, and that kind of skews what you think of them. Like, I think of someone like Nick Stauskas, who was probably in the perfect offensive system designed, tailor-made to exactly what he can do. Yeah. So you're going to lead to that guy getting overdrafted. Whereas if you play in a system where maybe they run awful stuff, they don't ever look that good statistically, well, then those guys, all of a sudden, they get in a better offense and they look completely different. So as far as the physical style of the Big Ten, I think that probably played an impact. But a lot of like Kobe's defensive problems as a freshman, I think, were as much kind of like mental and just processing the game faster. Like, it was a problem that he was this very skinny guy. But at the same time, like, I just remember, I think there was a game at Penn State and he probably got beat off the same action like 4 times in a row, and just they took him out of that game in the first half, and I don't know if he played again until like 3 weeks later. So I think it was more about just figuring out how to react to the game at that speed, because the Big Ten is a league where, as much as we talk about kind of the strength and physicality and playing through the post, the other thing is like these are really well coached. It's like an execution league. There's a lot of half court offense, and if you're not dialed into your stuff, I think you can get exposed pretty quickly. And that can really cause problems in a hurry and kind of prevent someone like that from getting on the floor. It's not like you're just going to get up and down and play your game. You have to really be locked into the scouting report.
Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. It's very easy to be caught up in everything that you actually have everyone else needs from you and never actually take a moment to think about what you need from yourself. I'm guilty of this for sure, in the midst of juggling all kinds of different work things and family commitments, etc. When we spend time giving all of our time, it could really sometimes leave us stretched pretty thin or even burned out. Therapy can give you tools to find more balance in your life, and part of that is being able to support others without having to leave yourself behind. Therapy is exceptionally helpful when it comes to learning coping skills or even setting boundaries. It can also help you step into the best version of yourself. If you thought about giving therapy a try, I definitely recommend giving BetterHelp that try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, and they'll match you with a licensed therapist. If you want to change therapists, you can do so with no charge at BetterHelp. Find a better balance with BetterHelp today. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA as well. Get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. I'm going to ask you about his skill set too, but we mentioned the strength a few times. That's kind of the area that I think even the Hawks have said, like, it's not a secret that he's going to have to get stronger. He's still quite skinny. He's gotten stronger, like you said. I think he weighed in like 185 at the combine for a guy who's like 6'4", 6'5". That's very, very thin.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of the main area that I know he's already kind of improved on, but like, do you see that as a potential limiting factor? Or can he actually add some strength more to this? Is I guess the question I'll ask.
Yeah, I think he probably can. Like, I don't see any reason. It's not like he's a guy who, like, the frame seems there to be able to put on weight. Like, I'm not that worried about that. I think he plays pretty tough, especially offensively with the ball, right? Like, his biggest strength, I think, offensively is his ability to get to the rim and finish, right? Like, that was not something you'd really expect if you think this is a scrawny kid who's going to get pushed around and whatever else. So I do think that he'll continue to add strength. I don't know that would not be my biggest concern with maybe his projection going forward. I think it'll just kind of be a natural progression, especially when you add in his age and everything else. So yeah, I'm not as worried about that. It's like, it seems like it's like someone who's short, like they've always been short and they know how to play short. So he's skinny, he uses it, right? Like he knows how to play into his frame on offense and defense, I think. So I don't worry that much about that. We'll see.
I think we agree. And I think because he knows that he's going to have to get stronger, and you throw in an NBA weight training staff and all that, like, I think he's going to be strong enough. He's never going to be this beast of a guy.
Yeah, he's not going to bully you in the post or anything,
right?
But
you mentioned the craft. I mean, finishing at the rim, I guess we can go to the offense now, because that's something I circled too. The numbers are great on it. The synergy numbers were fantastic. You wouldn't assume that just seeing him, again, how skinny he is, you wouldn't, first thing assumption, if you don't watch the guy, wouldn't be like, oh, great finisher at the rim, but that might've been his best trait this year. I'll ask you about that as well. And kind of what the role development was as well, because it's kind of been out there in the mainstream as a talking point. And I wonder what you think about this too. That Michigan kind of changed the offense a little bit in the middle of the season and kind of gave him the ball more. And I want to know if that actually happened in your mind, because that was kind of talked about between Jed and Kobe, especially. And then you throw in Hunter Dickinson, and we don't have to go through all of the Michigan ups and downs, but as far as like strengths and weaknesses, but also how his role developed and changed over the course of the season.
Yeah, so what you say, getting to the rim, that was his strong suit. And it's not just finishing. Like, you can finish if you're kind of a guy who catches, like, gets a lot of assisted baskets around there. Like, no, Kobe was all basically creating his own offense, getting to the rim and scoring. And that is just from studying college basketball, that's a rare ability. I think he shot like over 60% at the rim. That's not like a normal number. That's like way above average for a guard. So that's like A1 kind of what to be excited about from his game. Now, my one caveat would be, I do think that Juwan Howard designs really good offense to get his kind of primary ball handlers in position to get to their strong hand and finish. Franz Wagner was really good kind of with all these right hand finishes coming off of different actions. And Michigan really knew how to get Kobe going to his left, getting downhill and getting to the basket in a situation where he could finish. So some of that is system, but I still really like it. The big concern, I think, offensively, for me at least, and this kind of plays into his role, I guess you could say, but his jump shot and his three-point jump shot and how much confidence he has in it. He just couldn't make a shot for the first 6 weeks of the season. And then he went through kind of 2 weeks where he wouldn't take a shot. And then he went through January, February, where he just started making 40% of his threes and everything was awesome. And he looked like a pro. And it's like, well, if you're going to do that, okay. But there seems to be there would just still be these moments where he's not quite as confident in his 3-point shot. And I don't think there's something fundamentally wrong with his jump shot or anything like that. It's really just a matter of kind of the confidence to take those shots and hunt those shots instead of just take them if you're given them, right? And I think that'll come, but that's the big concern, and that plays into his role because when he wasn't taking those shots early in the season, he couldn't make those shots. It kind of threw everything out of whack a little bit. And then what happened to Michigan was Jalen Llewellyn tears his ACL in early December. So you're down a point guard, move Doug McDaniel into the starting point guard. He's a true freshman. He had to play basically 39 minutes every game. He was basically not playable before, he was still trying to figure out how to get into the rotation at that point. So that led to Kobe playing a lot basically every minute himself, right? He was the starting shooting guard, backup point guard, and now the guy who was kind of the savvy veteran as a 19-year-old sophomore in the backcourt. So that changed his role a bit. And then it was just sort of this starts making every shot. Like you're going to get him more and more touches. Jett Howard had some injuries, missed some games. And the reality is that it was almost like due to attrition that Michigan just kept losing pieces or pieces becoming less effective. And there was just more and more put onto Kobe Bufkin's shoulders. Like it's not like they ran different stuff or put him in different positions, really. It was just like, well, you're about all we have left, so we need you to score 20 now instead of 14.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot's been made of his last, I'm looking at now, 12 games. He averaged, I think, 17 and 6 and shot just incredibly well, 60% true shooting, all this stuff. And that's an arbitrary endpoint. I'll be the first to say that, but it was also his last 12 games. So it's like kind of, as you're peaking and growing and that gets a lot of attention, you kind of laid out why that happened. But I guess the question is how real that is, because I mean, the shooting is a question. I was going to ask you about that later, but we can get into a little bit more now. The way that I've put it, and I don't know if you agree or not, is like it's an area where I'm pretty confident that he can and will shoot. How good of a shooter he is the question. And I'm intrigued by what you said about the lack of sometimes, maybe confidence questions, because, that's something that I know in the NBA, especially with this Hawks team. And I'll say that, like, they want everybody to fire. They don't want anybody, especially on the perimeter. And, that's one of the things that I think Quinn Snyder's going to be like, okay, you can't be doing that. You have to, even if you're not making shots, you got to shoot shots. So, does that makeup wise, I mean, I don't think that's going to be a concern too much, but I do want to ask you about the jumper a little bit more in general. Like, do you think he's going to be an okay shooter for a perimeter guy in the NBA?
Yeah, I think so. And he can shoot off the bounce. He can shoot off the catch. Like, he shot really well in the mid-range. Like, I think all the signs are there that he will be a good shooter. And like you say, it's just going to be drilling sort of that mentality. And a lot of, like, the thing about college basketball is like a very hyped up level of pressure on every game that I don't think necessarily exists in the NBA. And it's not that like every NBA game doesn't matter, but it's just like a way bigger sample size. And the pressure of like any single college game can sort of like tank your whole season, and it can create this sort of just when you're struggling, it seems to make it exponential, right? Like you can kind of go through a shooting slump over an 82 game NBA season and it just sort of washes away. But if you slump for 8 games in college, it's a third of your season almost. It's like, okay, this is my draft stock. Like everything just sort of ties in and starts to build. So I do think playing as I'm not a guy who has to score every point and play every minute and make every shot and just can focus on his game. Like everyone swears by his work ethic, his kind of mentality, his makeup. Like those are all good things. I'm pretty confident he'll be able to shoot. Like since he was in high school, his ability, like, he can kind of create those off the bounce threes. Like I like his shot overall. I think his free throw numbers are all fine. So I'm not that worried about it. It's just going to be drilling that confidence over and over to say, okay, make those shots. And as far as the late season stuff, like it really just comes to that, like he shot 40% from 3. And when he was, that's going to change your stats, right? Like if you make threes, it's a simple game, basketball.
It is a very simple game sometimes if you make threes. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball season is in full swing now. You can take your first swing at betting MLB at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're a new customer, get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right, bet $20 and you get $200 back in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel also has great promotions each and every day, and they get paid instantly when you happen to win at FanDuel. The app is safe and secure, and they have all the kinds of betting angles that you're looking for. The entire range of sports you might be looking at: MLB, NBA, WNBA, NFL, college football, college baseball, college basketball, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, and much more. And they have different wagering options as well. Live betting, player props, futures, point spreads, totals, money lines. It's all there at FanDuel. And there's no better place to bet on either baseball, basketball, etc. than America's #1 sportsbook. Sign up today and FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 back in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel is the official partner of Major League Baseball. I wanted to follow up on what you said about the intel, because, you're around the team, and Landry Fields, the Hawks GM, made it a point to kind of go out of his way to say at the draft that the intel was great on Kobe. And I believe the quote was that they believe that he is, quote, in love with the game in a way that not everybody is. It sounds like from what you said, that's not going to be a question. I've heard good things too, but you're closer than I am. Great intel on Kobe for the most part.
Yeah, I've never really heard anything bad about him. I like, obviously, and I think guys should transfer if they want to transfer, but to have his freshman year go as it did, right? Like he didn't play. He was a McDonald's All-American. He had about as disappointing of a year as you could draw up, and he didn't decide to transfer or anything like that. He decided to come back. I think he even there was rumors about him transferring. I think he went to Juwan Howard, said, "No, I'm staying. I want to build. I want to stick to what I came here to do." And then he basically played his way into the 15th pick in the NBA draft 12 months later. I think everything there adds up about what he is as a player. I think he just kind of lives in the gym and wants to get better. And that's certainly what you want to see from a prospect at his age.
Especially when, coming to the Hawks, I know there was some reporting out there, I think it was true, that some of the guards in the draft didn't want to come to Atlanta necessarily because they have these two guards that are high profile guys. And I think, whether that was true or not, I think Kobe's going to come in and work hard by all accounts. Like you talked about how much he's a hard worker, and he's going to have to, because, for any rookie is going to be this way, but especially a guy who may not play a ton right away. And whether that motivates you or you kind of dictate the rest of your career, like how you handle that kind of first wave. But I think it's maybe good that he already had some adversity in his freshman year. I mean, a lot of guys have never had it. You know what I mean? Not to go psychoanalyze these guys, but a lot of guys just have never had any issue all the way through. And he had a bad season as a freshman, and that maybe helps.
Yeah, it can't hurt, I would say.
Yeah. Before we get out of here, I want to ask about the defense too, because he, like I said, he made fun of himself about his freshman year. You talked about earlier his defensive questions. I think now he's viewed as a potential plus defender in the NBA based on his length and the way that he can navigate screens and all that. But what did you make of his defense this year overall? And also, what was the calling card defensively for him in college, and how does that kind of translate, you think?
Yeah, so he basically really had to do just about everything for this Michigan team in a lot of ways, because Michigan lost a lot and brought it. Jet Howard was this great offensive prospect, but not a good defensive prospect in the slightest. And Doug McDaniel was a true freshman who was 5'11", and that's probably being generous. So then you look at Kobe's basically the guy who, one, he has to play every minute offensively. He has to kind of shoulder some reps on the ball, almost as a point guard. And then he's usually going to be guarding the opposition's best perimeter player on any given night for the entire time he's on the floor. So that's a lot. I don't think that's really something you'd want to ask one player to do in any normal situation. But he improved exponentially defensively. Obviously, it's easy to improve from unplayable to something else, but he was very good. And his length, I think, is really deceptive. He gets maybe a steal every other game where he just kind of pokes the ball free, near midcourt. He has good timing to block shots occasionally. He has really long arms, and those come into effect. He knows how to use his length, even though he kind of slithers around. He doesn't look overly quick, but his timing is great. And I think he'll be a good defensive player. I don't know that I'd ever say he's going to be this impact defensive guy, but I think he'll be plenty good defensively.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think too. I don't view him as he's not Cason Wallace, who has this all NBA ceiling defensively, But I do think that given the combination of his length, you use the word slither. That's so funny. That's been, I think, the most commonly used term with Kobe's screen navigation is slithery. Everyone keeps saying that same. It's kind of funny, but it does paint the picture of what he is. He's pretty crafty. He feels the game well. What do you make of his off-ball defense? It's a lot different in the NBA than it is in college, but is he? You mentioned earlier because of the inattentiveness off the ball sometimes as a freshman. Is that a concern? What's his attention level now, and kind of how he looks off the ball?
I didn't think of it as a huge concern his sophomore year. He definitely guarded sort of on-ball guys more than off-ball guys, I would say, just based on how Michigan's roster set up. I think probably a B plus. I don't think it was never a glaring issue to the extent that it was previously, I would say, this year. So yeah, I give him, I think, solid.
And overall, I've kind of described Kobe on my podcast as a guy who is not elite at anything, but also doesn't have really anything that I'm terribly concerned about, which it's been funny to hear the reactions to that, as you might imagine. Some people really like that approach, and some people are wait, he's not great at anything. I'm well, he's the 15th pick. He's not the 5th pick in the draft. He's the 15th pick, and that makes it a little bit more palatable. But Does that sound like a reasonable description in what you've seen with Kobe? Kind of like checks a lot of boxes, but isn't necessarily, maybe the finishing is elite, maybe something like that. But is that kind of a reasonable synopsis?
Yeah, I think for me, the big question with him is how his game grows. Like, is he a point guard? Is he a two guard? Like, he has the ability to be different parts of each of those, but I'm not sure how he gets there, right? Like, he was really good in ball screen situations for Michigan, but he shot on closer to, I want to say, like 3 out of every 4, compared to like a point guard. You would want more at like a little less than 50%, right? Like, he's an okay passer. He makes good passes, but he's not like a point guard level passer. And I think for me, that's maybe the big, other than his 3-point shot, like that's the swing factor, right? Are you going to just be kind of this microwave scoring kind of 2-guard combo guard off the bench, or can you be like an actual point guard facilitator? And I think he grew a lot in that area because Michigan needed him to this year. But that for me is going to be the swing. Like, okay, if you can do that, if you can be a point guard and a great passer, then all of a sudden you have a lot more, I guess, just like positional versatility, right? Like, there's a lot of 6'4" guards who can score a bit, dribble a bit, shoot a bit. Like, he needs to kind of find that one thing to differentiate himself. And I think that would be his point guard skills.
Yeah, that's a good point. And one of the reasons I like the fit in Atlanta is that he's playing with Trae Young, and like he doesn't have to be the point guard.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because that's one of the questions I got after the draft, as you might imagine. Like, okay, is he a point guard or a 2-guard? I'm like, kind of both in some ways. Like, I think he might, assuming Trae Young is on the team, and this is a more Hawks thing, but he'll never be asked to be the starting point guard on the Hawks as long as Trae Young is there. But he also might be asked, like he was at Michigan at times, like you said, to be kind of be the backup point guard and maybe play 8-10 minutes a game in that kind of stewardship role. I think he can do that. I'm not sure he's going to be able to do that right away as a rookie, because that's a lot to ask. But I think it's almost more of the appeal in this situation and the fit in Atlanta is that he doesn't have to be that. But you're right. I do agree, though. It would be nice for him to show more of that. And I also think that, particularly again in this situation in Atlanta, his defense is going to be more under a magnifying glass because he's playing with Trae Young. Long story short.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it'll kind of be tested. Like, he had to guard up a lot because, like, big wings, if Jet Howard couldn't really guard them, and now he'll probably have to guard maybe smaller, quicker guys, you would say, if you're going to have that same kind of issue at point. But I think it's a good point. Like, he doesn't have that sort of like elite single thing that's going to stand out, but there's just so much there. And again, you have to look at his age. Like, he is a sophomore, but he's younger than a lot of guys in this draft. So I really think there's still more to come, just sort of like simple foundational developmental things that maybe you don't get with other players.
Yeah, I listed a bunch of the freshmen in the draft that Kobe is younger than on the post-draft reaction show. People are like, wait, he's younger than this guy? I'm like, yeah, Brandon Miller, the Thompson twin, like all these guys that Kobe's younger than, and you would never think that because, there is a debate, I guess, about how much age matters versus class. And it's not just as simple as how old are you. That does matter. But given the way that, I'm glad you mentioned I haven't said the COVID thing, because like this entire group, at least these couple of years, are really impacted by that year plus of like weird development and evaluation. And that's part of the story too, I think.
Yeah, there were definitely some weird misses that high school class. So it would be 2 classes ago. Because that was the one, there's just nothing in the offseason, if I remember right. And that's sort of provides a baseline for these guys that you just didn't have with that group.
Makes sense to me. Well, Dylan, I appreciate all the time, man. If you have anything else to add about Kobe Bufkin that you're itching to get off your chest, please feel free. And if not, go ahead and plug everything you got going, because I know you are everywhere on the Michigan basketball beat.
No, I think that's about it. It seems like a good fit for Kobe. I'm excited to watch him kind of grow into that role. You can find everything I do at umhoops.com or follow me on Twitter at umhoops. Thanks for having me on.
I would encourage everybody to do that. Obviously, I know there are only some Michigan fans in my orbit here, but there are some. I will say, I always get, because they know I'm a Michigan fan, I'm always getting the Go Blues from some people who are Hawks fans. Maybe if you're a Michigan fan and you're not already following Hoops and all the content Dylan does, I'd recommend doing that. Thanks for doing this, man. I appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you.
As for everybody else, please subscribe to the podcast, tell a friend about the show, and we'll see you all next time.